2-minute warning. All righty, let's get everybody to their seats and conversations outside. Good morning. Welcome to Policy Board. Everyone should have a copy of the agenda. I'm going to add one piece of other business where Kevin Chu, and I don't see Kevin here right now, but he's back. There he is, hiding behind Dan. Going to give us an update on regional planning. So you should have our agenda and our proceedings from our May meeting. Are there any corrections to those minutes or any additional items that we need to consider on the agenda? Seeing none, they will be considered approved by consent. First item on our agenda is public comment. Jack, you have anything to say? Jack's asleep. You're the only public I see. All right, welcome, Jack. All right, first other item is our executive committee report. The executive committee met to discuss some policy guidance issues that have been brought up by various commissioners over time, and staff put together a white paper with the Administrative Oversight Committee to address various issues from compliance findings to amendment and addendum processes and other such things. We did not get through all of those in our meeting, and so we will be working on that at the annual meeting and hopefully have a document to provide to you there that summarizes these guidance changes. That was really the main focus of the executive committee, other than providing our executive director with his performance evaluation for the past year. That was an outstanding review by consensus, and so we certainly appreciate the job that our executive director is doing, and the staff that you have put together over the last year. So, with a lot of folks leaving, so you guys need to stick around a little longer than 6 or 8 months now. We need y'all to be here with us for at least a couple of years. So, but I do want to thank you all for coming out last night to the hospitality. It was great to see staff come out to that. It gives us a great opportunity to get to meet you and talk with you, and I think it makes us a more cohesive bunch. So thank you to staff, and especially to Bob. Good job, and thank you. We didn't really have a chance to talk about the annual meeting, but we will be meeting in Florida, and I didn't know if there was anything else we needed to brief the commission on in terms of the annual meeting. I don't believe there is. So are there any questions for me on the executive committee report? If not, that concludes my report, and I will turn it over to Tony to do a review of the stock rebuilding performance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Each year is part of the strategic plan. The commissioners have asked that staff put together a review of each of our species performance and looking at how well that stock is doing in terms of its health, as well as how well are we responding to the scientific advice in each of the species management boards and sections. We started this in 2009 and carry it through in the 2015 action plan. And the objective is to validate the status and the rate of progress that we're making on each species, and if it's not acceptable, to identify corrective action for those species. And what we hope to find at the end of the day here today is to get direction and feedback to species management boards if necessary, and also to have information so that staff can put together the 2016 action plan. So we have 5 categories for our species, and we finally did revise these and change the definitions, and those new definitions are now being used to put together the report from the last policy board meeting, and our 5 categories are rebuilt sustainable, recovery rebuilding, concern, depleted, and unknown. For our rebuilt and sustainable and recovering and rebuilding stocks, we have a couple here. The Gulf of Maine, Georges Bank lobster, Atlantic herring, bluefish, scup, spiny dogfish were all in the rebuilt sustainable category last year, and new to this category is menhaden, black drum, and I believe Spanish mackerel. Red drum also was recovering, rebuilding last year. I'm not going to go through any information on those species they're doing well. The boards are responding well to their statuses. Unless somebody has questions on those, I can take them at the end. For species of concern, we have Atlantic croaker, striped bass, black sea bass, coastal sharks, horseshoe crab, tautog, summer flounder, and the Gulf of Maine winter flounder. And I'm going to go through some details on species that we have new scientific information or the board has taken additional action since last year. There are some species that we don't have any new scientific information, nor have we taken any action, so I'm not going to go through those species unless commissioners have questions at the end on them. So first we have Atlantic croaker. Later this morning, the South Atlantic Board will get the updated traffic light information, which is presented here. The traffic light is another way of looking at how well the stock is doing in between assessments. The analysis is for the 2014 fishing year, and the results showed that there's declining trends in the fishery independent indices, as well as a drop in both the commercial and recreational landings. The harvest index was above the 30% threshold, which is the black line in the top graph, with a red proportion of 44.5% for the management measures. The management measures were not tripped since both the abundance index was below the threshold at the 14.2%, which is the bottom graph, and in order for management measures to be triggered, both the harvest and the adult composite has to go above the threshold. Although the plan review team was concerned about the declines that we're seeing in croaker, there is going to be an assessment coming out next year, and so the plan review team is going to suggest to the South Atlantic Board that they wait until they see the results of those assessments before taking action. Next, we have Atlantic striped bass. The assessment showed F in the terminal year was above the new F target, and spawning stock biomass had been declining steadily below the target since 2006. This indicates that even though the stock is not overfished and overfishing is not occurring, the spawning stock biomass is approaching its overfish threshold, and stock projections show that spawning stock biomass will likely fall below the threshold in the coming year because of the poor year classes from 2005 to 2010. The 2011 year class was strong and will mature into the spawning stock in 2016 and 2017. The Striped Bass Board responded to the scientific advice and implemented new reference points as well as state level regulations to reduce F to a level that was at or below the new F target for the 2015 fishing season, and the final implementation of all the state regulations are projected to reach the 25% reduction in F. For black sea bass, the unique life history characteristics, for example, that the species changes sex from female to male, contribute to uncertainty regarding the stock size response to exploitation. Therefore, an overfishing limit can't be specified for the fishery, which means the level of catch cannot be derived from the model results, and we use a constant catch harvest strategy for this species based on information that we get from the scientific committee coming out of the Mid-Atlantic Council. The major sources of uncertainty uncertainty are that the assessment assumes a completely mixed stock, but we have tagging evidence that suggests otherwise. We've seen changes in the spatial distribution of the stock, what we think may be due to warming waters, and we're seeing expansion of black sea bass into the north. Due to the life history strategy of the species, the assumptions of a constant natural mortality in the model may not actually be adequately capturing the dynamics of natural mortality. And again, the unique life history makes the determination of appropriate reference points very difficult for this species. We've pulled together prioritized research to reduce this scientific uncertainty, and some of these items are being worked on with the new assessment that we're doing jointly with the Mid-Atlantic Council in the upcoming years, and those are to develop reference points and assessment methods to account for the unique life history of the species, to explore a spatially structured stock assessment to address the incomplete mixing of the stock, and to evaluate implications of range expansion to the stock and fishery dynamics. For coastal sharks, we look at and work with HMS on these species. There's a couple of changes that we've seen in some of the statuses of the stocks. The poor beagle is now overfished, but overfishing is no longer occurring. And the smoothhound assessment was recently released, and it found that overfishing was not occurring, nor was it experiencing overfishing. The board has been working collaboratively with NOAA Fisheries in both management measures to be consistent with the measures that they're putting out, as well as the Shark Conservation Act. For summer flounder, the reported 2014 landings in the commercial fishery were approximately 8% over the commercial quota, and the recreational harvest in 2014 was approximately 6% over the recreational harvest limit. We had a recent update that came out for summer flounder in the past couple weeks, and that found that the stock was not overfished, but overfishing is occurring. There's been low recruitment since 2010, and there's a retrospective pattern that is evident in the assessment, and it has substantial implications on the reliability of the model projections. And the projections are made assuming that the ABC will be harvested fully but not exceeded. But the harvest trends that we've been experiencing have been actually exceeding some of our measures. So this indicates that the likelihood of catches exceeding the ABCs is high. In 2016 and 2017, the probability of overfishing is higher than what the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council's risk policy dictates. So there's been a recommendation for the upcoming fishing year of a reduction in catch from the 2015 harvest levels for this species, and the Summer Flounder Scup Black Sea Bass Management Board will be taking on this issue next week with the Mid-Atlantic Council jointly at their meeting in New York. For tautog, the overfished and overfishing is occurring on a coast-wide basis. We had an assessment that came out earlier in this year. The assessment recommended that we look at tautog on a regional manner, and it gave two options to look at the stock on a regional basis, and those stock statuses vary depending on how you combine the two regions. The Tautog Management Board has initiated an amendment to address the results of the assessment and look at these new regional approaches, and that process will be occurring through this fall. Moving on to the depleted species. For depleted, we have American eel, the southern New England lobster stock, American shad, northern shrimp, river herring, weakfish, and the southern New England mid-Atlantic winter flounder stocks. For southern New England lobster, it was found that the resource is depleted, but overfishing is not occurring. While overfishing is not occurring, the peer review panel recommended that effort must be curtailed in order to have any possible improvements in the stock. The inshore proportion of the stock is showing a dramatic decline in the spawning stock abundance. and that the offshore stock is highly dependent on the recruits that are coming from the inshore stock. So there is concern that if we don't see any increase in recruitment, that the offshore stock in southern New England will suffer. The TC advises to use output controls in the past, but the board has continued to use input measures in order to manage the fishery. And in the past, before we had this new assessment, the TC had advised 50 to 75% reductions in southern New England, and the board approved 10% reductions. For northern shrimp, due to failed recruitment, the stock is not expected to recover until at least 2017. We are at some of the lowest biomass levels that come from the Northern Shrimp Summer Survey. The stock assessment that was done last year did not pass peer review, so we use a series of indices to look at the status of the stock. Most of those indices, it's similar to a traffic light approach that we see with the croaker and spot approach species, and most of the indices are in the red and yellow for northern shrimp. So the section implemented a moratorium for the second year in 2014 and initiated an amendment to look at limited entry for the fishery in response to this poor stock status. For species that are unknown, we have Atlantic sturgeon, Jonah crab, spot, and spotted sea trout. Jonah crab is a new FMP that the full commission will be considering for approval later today. Jonah crab landings have increased almost 6.5-fold since the early 2000s, with over 17 million pounds of Jonah crab landed in 2014. The status of the Jonah crab resource is relatively unknown, and there's currently no data on juvenile recruitment. It's been recommended that we conduct age at maturity studies in order to produce an assessment for the Jonah crab species, as well as to investigate the extent of the annual migration patterns of the species. And the FMP does have monitoring requirements that'll help us get better information for Jonah crab, as well as puts in place some size limits and permitting and trip limits for the species in order to cap harvest at its current levels. And then lastly, we have spot. And sorry, my notes got deleted. And so spot is also undergoing a traffic light approach. Apologize. Okay. And the management board had followed the recommendations for the peer review team to monitor the stock, and the traffic light analysis showed a decline in harvest, primarily driven by a fall in the commercial landings. The adult abundance also fell and was above the 30% threshold at 45.3%, and the management measures were not tripped since the harvest index was just below the threshold at 29.4%. So this is similar to croaker in the sense that one of the triggers was hit but not the other, so therefore the PRT did not recommend to make changes in management, but the assessment will come out at the same time as the croaker assessment, so we can do a full analysis of what to do. Currently, we don't have any management measures in the FMP for spot. States themselves do have management measures, but we don't have any coastwide measures, which may be something that the South Atlantic Board will think about after those assessments have been released. And that is all. Questions?
Very good report. Lauren.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the excellent report. We are wondering about the northern It's off. Yeah. Am I back? back on? Okay, yeah. Could you put back Northern Shrimp slide, please? Could you put up the Northern Shrimp slide, please? Can you offer any explanation for that dramatic increase that occurred a couple of years ago, followed by a stunning plunge? We're wondering if that is symptomatic of any condition that we should know about. Thank you.
I will look to Mr. Grout to provide some insight on that.
We'll go to Karen. Either way, Lauren, Northern Shrimp are at the southern limit of their range, and it's very temperature dependent, and we had a very cold winter that spawned that big spike. We've seen this in the past. When we have very cold winters, we get increases in abundance, and then following that cold winter, I believe in the winters of 2012 and 11 and 12, I think it was, we had some of the warmest ocean temperatures on record, and which has precipitated the inability for recruitment to occur. And we're hoping, because we've had a couple cold winters, that a couple years from now we may be seeing a rebound.
Thank you, Doug. Dr. Pierce?
Yeah, Tony, could you put the summer flounder slide back up? As you noted, the board is going to meet next week with our Mid-Atlantic counterparts, and we're going to discuss what to do about summer flounder. My question is, wouldn't it be appropriate to include in this particular report the way it used to be prior to about a couple of months ago, in order to give commission members and others a better perspective as to what's going on? Because when looking at this figure, one would conclude that we did okay relative to rebuilding back in the 1990s, and we've been in neutral since 2002, not really working very hard to get to our target. But as we all know, that we have been, at least we thought we were, according to the assessment advice, we have been rebuilt for many years, and now we see where we are. So it's a startling reversal of fortune. And this is a document that has life. People look at it, and it gives a kind of a false picture of the good work that we have done to achieve our objectives, to be, to reach our goals towards summer flounder. So do you think it would be useful to put that figure in, the previous figure showing how we've done with spawning stock biomass relative to the target?
If the policy board would like me to add that figure, we can. The only trouble, I don't know if it would cause confusion to the public to have two figures with two sets of numbers in there, in the sense that for summer flounder, it's one of the unique species where the reference points change as you do the updates. So depending on the results of the assessment. So yes, I think it was 2011, we declared summer flounder rebuilt, and it was above its SSB level at that time. I think it only was above that SSB level for 1 year, and then we started to see the declines in SSB. And so I just don't know if it would be confusing to the public to have one set of reference points and one figure and then see another totally different figure now. But if you don't think it's confusing, then I'm happy to include it.
I would suggest then that not necessarily a figure, but a bit more text that would explain the reversal of fortune, because again, this board, we did some great work, and the industry had to go through a lot of sacrifice to get to where we thought we were, but now it's all come undone, and we're looking at cuts in quota and changes in the recreational limits that are going to be met with great resistance, fierce resistance, when we meet next week in New York City, which happens to be the interesting state for us to be in for this meeting because of a number of politicians who are quite concerned about fluke. So anyway, it's just additional text to explain what happened would be useful.
Too late to move that meeting? Tom?
Unlike Dave, the table I would like included into this document on summer flounder is the recruitment table based on the stock, what it was at periods of time. Because if you look at that table, I pointed out to the SSC when I went down to the SSC meeting, is the fact that when we were at 40 million pounds, 60 million pounds, we had great rebuilding. When we reached the plateau, it was about 80 or 90 million pounds, when recruitment seems to actually decrease with the larger the spawning stock biomass got to. We had great reproduction when we had small spawning stock biomass. Matter of fact, the benchmark assessment says spawning stock biomass is not tied into recruitment and is not the key player there. So I think that would be important to put there. What I also would like is a table with the size of the spawning stock biomass and the quotas going back to 96 when we first started implementing this plan. Because this fishery is, when you look at what was going on in 94, 96, 98, and you look at the size of it and the quotas we were fishing at, and the stock was still rebuilding very dramatically and increasing, and recruitment was good, we were basing out fishing on quotas of 22 million pounds, even up to 28 million pounds. And I'm trying to think of the last time we were at a quota that was 16 million pounds. And I think that was pretty much when the stock was all the way down at the end of this curve. So when we basically tell fishermen that we have rebuilt the stock, that the numbers look great, we're actually at these are the highest numbers that we have recorded if you look back at the time period on the spawning stock biomass, and yet we're not rebuilding more. There's other factors involved, whether it's environmental, whether we're trying to rebuild all the stocks, where it's competition of food and everything else. But it's not, I think in this case, really based on fishermen. And I can understand, I can't explain 2010 and 2011 of poor recruitment, but I can explain 2012 and 13. There was a little thing called Sandy that washed every fluke out of the bays in New York and New Jersey and probably in Delaware that had just come in starting in October to basically spend the winter over and actually grow that half inch until they're 9 inches, and they all got washed out with Hurricane Sandy. So that's a really natural occurrence. I know we don't put that in tables, and we never consider hurricanes in stock assessment. We have never done that, but it's a place to start looking at it. So this discussion is going to be interesting next week. I look at it, you know, I'm bringing a lot of extra granola bars to sit there and listen through it, so it should be going on good. But I think we should put that information out there. I really would like a chart on all the quotas where we were from 96 on, because that's really when we started implementing the plan.
Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it might be overcomplicated, but it strikes me that there's two ways that a stock can change its status. And one is that it changes status just in the process of a turn of the crank assessment, where you watch the trend of the stock. And the other is when it changes stock status based on a new benchmark, as happened with menhaden and as happened with summer flounder. And I wonder if it's worth making a distinction between those two situations, and when stock status changes as a result of a new benchmark, maybe providing a couple sentences about the things that were different in the new model. You know, we should all be grateful that science changes and grows and evolves, and we learn more and we use new information, but it is confusing, I think, to the public when, you know, on one side of an assessment everything's fine, and then you come out of the assessment and you got big problems. So I think maybe a little bit more explanation there could be helpful.
Just a question for you, Lynn, then. The purpose of this document in the past has not been a piece for the public to see see all of that history, but more to here's what the latest information is and here's how the management boards have been responding to that information to be able to judge whether or not boards are actually responding to scientific advice from the policy board's perspective and whether or not they need to have discussions with those particular species boards about additional actions that need to be taken or less actions that need to be taken. I guess it could go both ways. And so I'm happy to add that other information in here as well. But we do have that type of information that you're speaking of in our statuses of the stock, one-pagers, as well as when we do benchmark assessments, we do the primers that are a couple pages that explain all the differences and the changes in the assessments. And just for everybody's knowledge, summer flounder actually didn't go through a benchmark. It was just an update, and technically it is still considered rebuilt, but we moved it into a species of concern since SSB levels were declining and overfishing is now occurring. So staff moved it into a species of concern, even though technically it's rebuilt, and it doesn't fall out of that rebuilt category unless the SSB were to fall below the threshold, as well as the fishing mortality is above the threshold.
Jim Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Lynn and everyone, if you hadn't seen, the Mid-Atlantic put out a fact sheet last evening that actually describes a little bit of this more layman's terms as to how the assessment was done and a little bit more detail to make it more understandable. So I think that'll help with that. So if you don't have a copy of it, Chris Moore had sent it out last evening, so we should probably get a copy of that for everybody. And I will say I don't agree with everything in it, but at least it gives some basic information.
It's good to know. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Tony, and to staff for doing this work. I think it's a really excellent job to have these snapshots available for the public in particular. On lobster, there's a little black line on the lower right. Is that supposed to be there? What does that mean?
So it's the 3-year average. It's the terminal 3 years average because the TC has cautions about using the terminal year estimate for abundance. They average the last 3 years, and that's what that value is. And if it's not labeled, I can label that.
Thank you, and I think it does need to be labeled. I think that's really my point. And then I just would also just note up under assessment findings, the first bullet, depleted and overfishing not occurring, it just seems to be sort of a mixed, it's just sort of hard, I think, for the public to wrap their heads around those two concepts, which really don't relate very well. I think it might be easier to speak to the depleted aspect of the stock and then note, perhaps in sequence, overfishing not occurring, current exploitation below threshold. It just seems like it's mixing things there, depleted or overfishing not occurring. If overfishing were occurring, the two would kind of work well together, perhaps, but I'm just trying to think of a way to convey information to the public in a way they can get their heads around, and to me that mixes things up, but just a little bit. So I just think a slight restructuring of those bullets might be helpful. Thank you.
And the peer review did touch on this in that they do believe that this overfishing that is not occurring is slightly misleading in terms of management responses, because it seems to indicate that you wouldn't need to have a management response there, but the stock is, the reference points probably aren't really set up in a way that, you're at the lowest stock level that we've ever had, and so therefore your abundance indicators aren't going to be able to go up unless you curtail fishing effort. And so that is what they did say in their peer review report.
Richie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To that point, Bob, the technical committee and review panel believe the stock has little chance of recovering unless fishing effort is curtailed. So maybe something like that could be added to the not overfishing, and then have that's out of the stock assessment report, have that in quotations or something, because clearly we're not formally overfishing, but the stock is not standing the fishing pressure we're exerting on it.
Tom?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions on lobster, and I don't know whether we should do this under other business. One is that we need to stop calling the Southern New England stock, because really it's 3 states in New England and 5 in the Mid-Atlantic, so we really need to do a name change. It's just very confusing to the states that when you tell your lobsterman, well, it's Southern New England, he says, wait a minute, we're in the Mid-Atlantic, and there's 5 of them. So we need to, whether we call it, the Mid-Atlantic in Southern New England fishery or something like that. The other one was where there was talk about voting on the board, and I don't know if you want to cover that now or whether you want to do that later.
Much later.
Okay. But I'd like to put it on the agenda for under other business.
Yeah, I'd like the lobster board to decide what to call lobsters.
Yeah. But about the voting, I'd like to cover that today.
I'm not sure what that issue is.
It was an issue at I have never seen on a board where a council actually voted on the board, and there was a call for that. I think it might have been a mistake, and we need to straighten that out, because the only voting members on the board, are the states, and we usually let members from the council basically be officio members, but not voting members on the board. And so there was a lot of concern over that, especially on lobster.
What I'd like to do with that, Tom, is move that into the executive committee's guidance criteria and have that discussed so that it's consistent with the under guidance policies that we're going to be bringing back to the commission. Okay.
Thank you.
Is that satisfactory to Bob?
He's having a sidebar conversation, Louis.
Oh,
can you re-ask? Sorry.
Just that Tom had raised a concern about voting on the lobster board, and I just said that instead of discussing that today, I would like to discuss that in our group, discussing the guidance policy processes.
Great. Yeah, we will add that to the white paper that we're working on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Dave.
So, Tony, what you're presenting today is just a summary for us for this meeting. It's not necessarily for broad public consumption or to send the main message out, is my understanding. And I was going to say the press release on lobster, for example, that Tina sent out yesterday was very comprehensive, very detailed, provided a really good summary of the findings, where we are, the difference between the technical depleted but not overfishing, with the follow-up information but this stock is still in terrible shape and things need to be done. So I think that's the message that went out to the public, and I think some of the other documents that you've mentioned, and even the plan review, I think spells out some of the details that may be missing in a summary slide that you put together for us today. Is that fair?
That's correct. And so what the objective out of today is there anything that the policy board wants to bring back to any of the particular species management boards if they're not, reacting in ways that the policy board feels they should be? Or is there anything in the action planning for the upcoming year that the policy board thinks needs to be addressed for any particular species, and staff can add that as part of our planning process for the annual meeting?
And that's a very important point. So I don't think we necessarily need to go in and spend too much time wordsmithing or modifying. This is really for us. And I think there's one issue that just due to some scheduling difficulties that I had, I won't be able to be at the South Atlantic board. But I know we've received some comments on spotted sea trout. And again, that may be with some of the concerns that have been raised about being more restrictive than the feds in certain states. It may be reasonable to consider removing spotted sea trout from the South Atlantic Board's purview and not have a fishery management plan for spotted sea trout. But that would be one issue that I think is important for at least to have that discussion at the South Atlantic Board instead of dealing with these issues that we're dealing with now. So I think that's kind of that kind of information, sort of the intent and purpose. I know I had another hand up somewhere. Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. when it comes to summer flounder fluke, there was a discussion earlier about what to supply the public with as far as information, because you didn't want to confuse anybody. Before the May meeting, I was part of the public, and when it comes to summer flounder, I'm confused. It's a mess. And I really think that this body would be remiss if it didn't supply every bit of information that it had, so somebody can try to figure out how we went to, Xanadu to let's have a 46% reduction, and then somehow we do a math problem. We're looking at our risk factor, and now we're down to 20, a measly 29%. So I really think that the public should have access to every bit of information to try to digest what's going to happen. So that would be my recommendation to this board.
I think that's good advice, and I think we're putting together that information. I think it would be helpful, perhaps, and if you disagree, obviously, I think Dr. Pierce is the chairman of the Summer Flounder Scott Black Sea Bass Board. My understanding, Eric, is that these years of poor recruitment that may have been environmentally induced or storm induced resulted in this decline in spawning stock biomass that has put us into an overfishing situation that we're supposed to stop. And so the question is, I think, Dr. Pierce, if you could perhaps provide the policy board with your understanding of the options that may be considered next week by your board and the Mid-Atlantic Council. Everything I've heard is a 43% reduction in the quota, and I'm hearing some additional things, and I don't know if you have any insight into what those might be.
Again, I could call a friend, Michael Weezy, if he's here. Is Mike here? He is not here? Okay. The Mid-Atlantic Council apparently already has had some updating as to what has happened and what might happen at the board meeting next week when we meet with our council counterparts. My understanding is, and I'm still trying to get a clear understanding, my understanding is that the SSC of the council has offered us some advice regarding the nature of the cuts we should have, and that we will be looking at not a large cut initially, but a much less cut, 2 or 3 years of cuts. I think Tony has perhaps more insight into this. So it's not as bad as it could be, but it is bad, and frankly, it is embarrassing for all of us, I suspect, because as already indicated, there will be great uncertainty and concern. And even though there have perhaps been some environmental effects and poor recruitment or below average recruitment in the last few years, that doesn't provide an understanding of why suddenly all of the data going back in time have been adjusted so that we're no longer rebuilt and going down. We've never been rebuilt. So there'll be some explanation. I guess it's already been provided as noted by the executive director of the Mid-Atlantic Council. I haven't seen that announcement yet. But so it's not as bad as it's going to be, but it's still not good. If so, you could turn to Tony, Mr. Chairman. She may have some additional insights into that.
I don't have all the percentages off the top of my head, David, but I can say that originally when the assessment update came out this early summer, it indicated that we would need a 43% reduction. That is what originally went to the SSC, and the SSC is the scientific body, for those of you that don't know, that look at the to give recommendations to the council and commission on an acceptable, an ABC. And the council staff put together a memo that looked at an alternative way to get at the necessary reductions that came out of the assessment update, and that was to spread those reductions over a 3-year time period. And so relative to 2015, next year, the first reduction would be around 28 or 29%, and then in the following 2 years there would be 2 more additional reductions that are also in the 20s. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but those the 20% is relative to the 2015 allocation. So the SSC looked at that staff memo and found that it can work. To my understanding, Garfo staff also said that that falls within the purview of Magnuson and what the council can work with. And so that is the recommendation that is being put forward to council staff. I also believe that there has been a recommendation to do another assessment update for the upcoming year. So we would get fresh and new information for the 2017 fishery in 2016.
Is that helpful? And do we? Is there more information that we think we can provide to the public, or to address Eric's concerns?
So the meeting materials for the Mid-Atlantic Council has the SSC documents, the monitoring committee documents, the assessment update, staff memos, all of that information. Just like we do our meeting materials, they provide the same meeting materials. Those meeting materials should have been provided to the Summer Flounder Scup Black Sea Bass Board for folks to review, and that's available to the public for them to have as well. And we do try to put out a press release after the meeting to explain what happened and why it happened. And we have in the past put together white papers with fact sheets to explain different things that are going on in the Summer Flounder Scup Black Sea Bass fishery when things have been difficult to comprehend and understand. And I just tried to open up that white paper that the council put out, and I can't get it to open, but we'll look at that and see if there's something similar that we can put out on the website as well.
Okay. Thank you. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Tony, I'm not sure if it's in the materials, but the most frequently asked question we're getting, and that most of the public doesn't understand, is that the SSC sets the ABC, and they're bound by Magnuson. So there's a lot of questions about, well, we're not going to stand for this, correct? I said, no, it's based in federal law. So once they set that, the council really can't adjust that. So if we could have a little bit, if they're not in there already, some description about the legal requirements under this, because nothing's going to change next week at this meeting other than there's going to be a lot of unhappy people.
We can work on that.
I hear that. A lot of unhappy people. Anything, Tom?
And that brings up a bigger question, is that we're going to a meeting which we have really no choice in doing anything but rubber stamping with the SSC. And that's the way it's gone on for the last, since the SSC was put in charge and basically the rules were set and talking about it. So really, why are we having this meeting? If we basically, especially on Summer Flounder, maybe black sea bass and scup, we can have some discussion. But if we're stuck with a quota, we're going up there just to rubber stamp whatever has been done. I mean, a couple of years ago, because we got so upset, we actually voted against with the SSC, and of course, the federal government decided that they would shut the EEZ down if we did that for commercial and recreational fishing, and we basically reversed the vote. We said that we would set up a separate quota. Now, that's probably not going to happen to us again, because, again, with the fear of shutting down the EEZ, how it affects both the commercial and the recreational fishing industry, because a lot of it takes place in the EEZ, there'll be a lot of concern on doing that. But we're spending all this time, effort, and money to go to a meeting on Summer Flounder, which has already been set, which the rules have already been there, and we're not going to be able to appeal any of that at this meeting. So I'm trying to figure out why we're going to this meeting. I mean, if it's a pre-conclusion that's already established, I don't feel comfortable. I mean, we could basically vote no confidence in what you're doing, and that'll be interesting to see what happens. But just for me to go up and rubber stamp what the SSC did is not, I don't feel comfortable doing that. And we've been doing that for the last 5 or 10 years.
The only thing that I can provide, Tom, is that it is a jointly managed species, so we do, in every effort, try to work collaboratively with the council through the process and working with them. That said, if the board is not in agreement, they can try to suspend the rules with the council. That takes concurrent votes from both the council and the board to suspend those the rules that we work in conjunction with each other, so having like motions. And if you can suspend the rules, then the board can provide their own motions, and they're unique to the commission. That does pose issues down the line where state waters will have different quotas and measures than federal waters, and if a person has a federal permit, then they are bound by those federal water measures regardless of where they're fishing. So in the past, the board has steered away from suspending the rules and to continue in their efforts to work collaboratively with the council through the process that we're under with these jointly managed species.
Follow up.
Yeah, but how likely is the Mid-Atlantic Council going to basically vote to suspend the rules, because all they have to do is vote no, and we're stuck again? So, I mean, this is, you're talking about a true catch-22, and this is ridiculous, and I've been complaining about this for a long time. Winter flounder, we go our separate ways, and we found out that they did just the opposite on winter flounder when they opened up the EEZ for 5,000-pound trip limits, and now we're doing it with summer flounder. We're going the opposite direction than I think a lot of us sitting around this table feel like it, that we should be doing, and we have no control over it. So I'm not happy with the way the plans are jointly managed. I've asked to put that on discussion. I don't know, you're going to probably tell me we need to push that up to the executive committee, but we really need to do something about this because it's not working. And again, maybe from I don't know if we have to put this in the document, but I really want to see a list of the quotas that we started with from 96 on, because to tell me that this stock is that big and we're going to a 16 or 7, because that's what the new proposal is under the 29% reduction. I was at the SSC meeting. It's going to be about 17 million pounds, and that's unacceptable with this size of a stock. And the strain we're going to put on both commercial and recreational sectors. I mean, probably if they had said 43%, they would probably have said, shut the EEZ down because we'll fish in state waters and catch whatever quota we have because we're doing this and we're upset on it. But now they gave us a little taste at 29%. So, we're only going to reduce you by 29%. And the frustration there, 29% is a huge. And also, some of this is best on MRAP's data that we look at where we're in problems. And I can just look at the number of trips in the Mid-Atlantic region, if you can trust MRAP's, that we're down a total of 8 million trips from 2007. In 2013, we had 900,000 less summer flounder trips, and we caught more fish than the year before. It just doesn't make any sense.
Dr. Pierce.
Tom's giving us a preview of what he's going to say next week, and others will repeat what he just said. He makes many good points. They're very valid points. At board chair, I'm going to be asking the states in particular at the meeting to offer up some opinions regarding the extent to which we as contributing states, the degree to which we can reduce management uncertainty, because if we can come up with some compelling arguments that there's some things the states can do to reduce management uncertainty, then that will put the National Marine Fisheries Service, I suspect, and the Council in a far better position to justify cuts that are not as severe. Because obviously we reduce the quotas to account for management uncertainty. This has always been an issue, and now I think it's become an even more important issue. So it'll be up to us as states to try to make some convincing arguments, and if we can't, then I suspect we will be going down to do the will of the Council. And of course, many members here, many state members here are members of the Council. We have dual hats.
It's a tough gig. It's going to be particularly difficult for, in North Carolina, we're dealing with a southern flounder, summer flounder issue too, and we're looking at the potential of even further lowering our size limit on southern flounder to try to harvest more male fish, because we're not harvesting any male southern flounder. And so it's going to put a real put our state in a very difficult position if they come back with increasing size limits or however we end up with disparate management actions in inside waters versus ocean waters. So just a taste of our discussions for next week, I guess. Last word on this issue, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what we're doing on summer flounder, is that we're harvesting all the females. We're not harvesting the males either, because when we raise the size limit, and that's been a lot of consternation by the community, it says by raising size limit, because the only thing we're going to be doing at a 29% reduction is we're going to have to raise size limit and cut seasons. And so we're going to fish on more females and less males. So we're doing the same thing on summer flounder as you're doing with southern flounder.
It's going to be a mess. All right. Any other burning words on something other than summer flounder for this report? I mean, I just didn't want to make sure. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just an observation and maybe a note to file away for the future, maybe next time we evaluate these criteria, and that is that they strike me as being pretty much single species oriented. What's the status of sustainability of trends for that one population? That maybe doesn't capture the complete picture for certain species for which we've identified broader ecological roles. So as we come to grips with those roles, and I know that's a challenging thing we've spent a lot of time on, and hopefully we'll make progress on in the future. Perhaps those components can be incorporated into our stock evaluations as well.
Okay. All right. With that, I believe, and Tony has indicated that it is her opinion that the discussion that we had related to summer flounder handles agenda item 8. Unless there's, and that's what I was going to bring up, unless there's other discussion. So think about that before we get to that option, and if you feel we've had a good discussion on that issue. If not, we will take it up. So with that, I'm going to move to Mark Robson to review and consider the Law Enforcement Committee Enforceability Guidelines. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been asked to present you with a revised enforceability guidelines document that the Law Enforcement Committee has prepared for your consideration. To give you a little bit of background, the charge to the Law Enforcement Committee in this regard, I think I wasn't here in 2009, but the original guidelines, which are called Guidelines for Resource Managers on the Enforceability of Fishery Management Measures. That document was prepared in 2009 with the help of you, the members of the Commission and the staff, and also the Law Enforcement Committee. They were designed to provide you with enforcement advice and some guidance information in designing and crafting various management plans and management options for fisheries. They included some pretty general enforcement precepts, and also through a ranking or rating survey that was done at the time of the Law Enforcement Committee, provided some ratings for various management strategies that you might employ, things like bag limits or closed areas. We were asked in 2015, through the direction of the Commission's action plan for that year, to take a look at that document and provide any updates or revisions as needed. And we were able to do that, and that new revision has been provided to you today. I believe it's in the briefing documents, and so we are here today to kind of review that with you in general, and also to seek your direction or any approval if you have of that revised document. Next slide. So to give you just a real brief background, the Law Enforcement Committee reviewed the original document and We went through it, made some edits, updates, changes at one of our meetings, and then after that we had a resurvey or a re-ranking process that we went through online with LEC members, where we re-ranked the management strategies and then revised and changed the presentation of that as a sort of a matrix table of the ranking of those various management options. I'll show that to you later. After that survey was done, we incorporated that new matrix table into the revision, and we also took a look at a very similar document that had been prepared after our 2009 enforceability guidelines that was prepared by the U.S. Coast Guard and some of the other federal partners. And so they had some additional material that we incorporated into our revision. Next. Very quickly, the guidelines format that we've employed now in this revision is, if you look at the document, you'll find three basic sections. The first one is sort of a general outline of the enforcement precepts that we often bring to you or talk about when we're discussing management strategies and their enforceability. And those general precepts are laid out in terms of what we consider the need for simplicity, consistency, stability, effectiveness, and safety of management regulations or management options that are employed. So you can walk through that and see some general ideas about how those things can apply to your thinking when you're developing management options as regards their enforceability. The second section is a simple presentation of that matrix table, which again I'll get to here in a second, so you can just take a look at it, but it's in the document, which lays out from that survey result the overall enforceability ratings that we give to the various management strategies that were looked at. We also break down those strategies in terms of their ratings by an overall numerical score and then a more or less qualitative score of yes, no, neutral on a particular management option for dockside enforcement, at sea enforcement, and also for airborne enforcement considerations. And then the third section is a more detailed sort of run-through or listing of various management options that we looked at in the document and provides that overall rating for each of those strategies with some additional, more specific recommendations that could enhance enforceability of a particular management strategy. Next. I wasn't able to blow up the size of this very well, but it is in the document. On the left, you can see this is the revised ranking matrix that we came up with our survey. On the left are the list of the management strategies or options that we took a look at. There's an average numerical score, and then you can see a kind of a red, green, yellow approach to evaluating the enforceability of those various management options. Again, this is in your document. And with that, I think that concludes my general overview of this report. I guess, Tony, if you're, we certainly would welcome any comments, suggestions for changes, or any concerns that you might have about this revision, and we seek your guidance and direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It'd probably be good to have that table back up on the screen if we can get it up there. Yeah. Tom?
As most of you here remember Rob Winkle, that was chief of law enforcement of the state of New Jersey. Rob's big concern was always on, I'm looking at page 9, right at the top, requiring to me, it's on page 9. But it talks about how fish should remain intact and basically states how fish, if you flay them at sea, that you need skins and things like that. And Rob's concern was that a lot of states had not done that. And without doing that in enforcement, once you flay a fish and you don't keep the skin in the rack and bring it in, how do you basically make sure that it's basically been done? And Rob asked me the same question every time I see him until this day. When are we going to straighten this out? And I wondered if we have surveyed all the states and looked at what their flaying regulations, whether it's striped bass, summer flounder, to make sure that the flay size or what should be done on summer flat. In New Jersey, if you were allowed to have flaying at sea, you have to bring in the racks, and that's only really on party boats. It might be on charter boats now, I don't remember. But you basically still need the racks to bring it in. You got to dump those racks before you make the next trip, so you have the racks, and it's got to correspond to the number of flays. I would like to know how many states do that, because that's the only way you can to reinforce what's going on with the size limits. And if you don't have that, then according to him, who is chief of law enforcement, you really don't have an actual enforceable law. So I have never seen a survey done of all the states actually where their flaying laws at sea are on the recreational sector. And I'd like to see that report when we get a chance. So I could have Rob stop yelling at me every time he sees me.
Well, it's not so worried about Rob yelling at you, but it's an interesting. I did not realize, and this just shows my ignorance, I didn't know that we allowed that anywhere. I mean, in North Carolina, that's considered a mutilated finfish if you don't bring it in intact. Anything with a size limit has to be landed whole. So that's a surprise to me. So
some states don't do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Best way I can put that. I would imagine that would be very difficult. So are we wanting to look at all commission species? Is this something that the policy board wants to look at? I mean, this kind of hits me by surprise.
Yeah. My suggestion is you turn it back to the Law Enforcement Committee, ask them to survey each state what they are about their flaying laws at sea, and then we can look at this and see if it is a problem.
I think that's a good suggestion to the Law Enforcement Committee, if there's no objection from the board. So ordered. Good point. Any further direction or comments to the Law Enforcement Committee, and specifically Mark Robson? This is an action item, so we will need to approve this guidelines document. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark, thank you for the report. I was just curious, I didn't see under here whether the Law Enforcement Committee had taken any opinion as to when would be the best time to tag a fish in those fisheries that require the fish to be tagged that are landed, such as striped bass. I mean, like whether while they're at sea, while they're landed at a dealer, was there any opinion offered on that?
I'll have to review the document to see if that's addressed. I know in the past, particularly when we were discussing the striped bass tagging program, the recommendation was that the fish should be tagged as soon after harvest as possible, and so I think that would probably be the recommendation in such a guideline as this.
Yeah, before landing, or you would run into some problems, I would think. Richie, sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellent report. I'd just like to suggest, I'm sure staff is going to take law enforcement's comments about conservation equivalency in their preparation of the white paper they're working on, so I just would make sure that happens. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So any specific changes, modifications to this document? If not, I would accept the motion to approve the enforceability guidelines. Tom? Motion by Mr. Fody, second by Lauren Lustig. Is there any further discussion on the guidelines? Mr. Abbott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is a very good document, and I appreciate the efforts. And there's surely a lot of information in there. But following our acceptance of it, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to incorporate this in some way into our fisheries management plans, that as we prepare them, that we would not we do forward the plan to law enforcement, but have them review it against the matrix and give us an indication or an overall indication of the enforceability of the management plan?
I think it is what it is. It's a guidance document that folks could use to say, you don't feel that this is an enforceable action, or it's not as enforceable as another option, and it would be used in your argument for a certain management measure over another, I would think.
But it would be helpful if we had a definite position from the Law Enforcement Committee on every issue that we're dealing with.
Dennis, I don't think this precludes getting law enforcement recommendations at board meetings. I think there's sort of two ways that this document gets used. One, as Louis just said, as you're building your arguments, if you don't have a law enforcement recommendation yet, or the committee wasn't tasked to look at something, you can go and look to see, oh, well, this seems to be, in general, more enforceable because what it says in the guidelines. And secondly, sometimes TCs will discuss certain things and enforceability can come up. And if the committee hasn't talked about something, and the staff could say, well, this is their general guideline on this type of issue, and they can use the guidelines that way.
Well, yes, I think what we can do as a law enforcement committee, we try to make sure we work with staff to coordinate any comments on any particular commission action that's coming up. One of the benefits of this document is to hopefully use it in earlier stages of plan or amendment development or addenda development, so that you can kind of get an advance idea of what might work and what might not work really well as far as enforceability. I think what we can do now with this revised document is make sure that when we look at various issues for the commission, that we ourselves as a committee go back and look at the guidelines document, and when we do come back to you with recommendations, we very clearly point out where in this document or where in these enforceability ratings a particular management option stands, and why we might feel how strongly we might feel about the enforceability based on that document. There are always, as you deal with in your own deliberations, even in enforcement, sometimes there is not a real black and white answer for what is enforceable and what's not. It may depend a little bit on the condition of the fishery or the species or the location. So we might say something is particularly unenforceable in the document, or not as enforceable as some other option, but that might be mitigated somewhat by the fishery or the circumstance. So I think what we need to do as a committee is also use this document, and when we come back, we point out specifically in the ratings or the rankings where a particular management action stands.
Thank you. That's what I was wanting to hear.
Richie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to follow up on that, I mean, I think a board, when we're creating a PID, I think a board could look at adding that to options in a PID. So we could, one fish 28 inches, is that red, green, or yellow law enforcement? So we could, if a board chose, so that's something clearly I think we can think about going forward.
All good comments. I had one issue with the document. If we've got we don't have the table up, and I may be the only one looking at it this way, so if I am, just tell me. But the thing, I would hate for somebody to look at this table and conclude that airborne is not important. that because it's critically important, and that would be my only concern. So I think if maybe there could be some statement in there that indicates, the critical nature of enforcing shellfish closures. EPA requires certain things. Make sure it's very clear in the document how important air support is. Please.
That's a very good point, Mr. Chairman, and it was pretty surprising to see how that stood out in the matrix. And you're absolutely right. It doesn't imply that airborne enforcement is not effective or valuable, because a couple of members pointed out there are certain kinds of management activities that it's essential to have airborne coverage, particularly with closed areas and things like that. So I think what we need to do is make that point, and we'll make sure we add that to the document.
Any other? Roy?
Mr. Chairman, I would just add to the comments already made that this is potentially a very useful document. And, as we consider future deliberations, if Mark would bring it with him or remind us of its content and we could refer to it regularly, it would be helpful rather than a one-time exposure and trying to remember what it said. So I would like to see this used regularly for our purposes in deciding on management measures. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there are ways that we can do that simply. So we have an LEC rating under each management option that's consistent with the table. Might be helpful. Yes?
And one point along those lines, I think it mentions it in the document too, but this we consider somewhat of a living document. So at any point we can do a re-ranking or a resurvey to include the latest thinking about how these different management options work out. And I think we constantly want to be looking at those enforceability issues as things change, like technology and so forth.
Doug?
And I assume if we approve this, that this will go up on the website under our guidance document, so that maybe we could include it with each meeting. Meeting announcement, we always put a series of guidance document links to them. We can include this so that we can all have access to it throughout the meeting.
We'll get Tina to add that too.
It will be done. If it's approved. Any other comments on the motion on the floor? And I'll read that real quick. To move to approve the LEC enforceability guidelines. Motion by Mr. Fody, second by Mr. Lustig. Further discussion? Any objection? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mark. Good piece of work. All right. Next, we've got Katie's going to go over stock assessment updates on weakfish and sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you're all excited to hear this. So Weakfish had its assessment meeting last week, and we were scheduled for a November peer review through ASMOC's external process, but at the assessment meeting, we decided that the data gathering and finalization was not as far along as we would have liked, although we're satisfied with where the models are in terms of model development and choice, and so we are going to recommend that it actually be peer reviewed in January, which would give us additional time to complete the model runs and to finish writing the document. So that'll put us a few months back of where we were originally scheduled, but not a huge delay.
I was actually very excited to hear your report on the weakfish stock assessment because I'm anxious to see what happens with that thing. Any comments or questions about the schedule for weakfish? It sounds like we'll have a January peer review, so we'll have it in our winter. No?
Depending on the timing of the peer review, usually the peer reviews have, I believe we give them 3 weeks to get the report back to us. So if it's highly unlikely that we would have it at the February meeting, definitely at the May meeting. We can do our best to see if we could do February, but
yeah, I mean, if we can have February, that'd be great, but understand that some of that's beyond our control.
Yes.
So, Robert?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to echo your enthusiasm to see the results of the stock assessment. So those of us in the Southern Range are waiting with bated hooks.
And hooks. Because they're everywhere, man. We can't get away from them. All right, Sturgeon. Is that good news too?
Sturgeon continues apace. We've worked with NOAA. They've agreed to dedicate some of their Northeast Fisheries Science Center scientists' time to helping us with working with the technical committee to develop bycatch estimates up through the most recent years of data from their data source. And in addition, we've also started reaching out to the owners of acoustic tags up and down the Atlantic coast in order to get their data, which we think is going to be a great source of information for the stock assessment, but obviously it's a huge network spread out through a lot of different people, and it's a ton of data to actually work with, so hopefully we can get that started and get a hold of that information for the assessment.
I'm sorry John Bullard's not here for this discussion. How are they using the, are they and how are they if they are using it, how are they using our observer coverage information? I mean, we've got a very detailed now time series, we're developing a time series of good observer coverage information for sturgeon in North Carolina.
Absolutely, and North Carolina's data is definitely also being analyzed. We actually have Laura Lee from North Carolina who's doing a lot of the analysis on that, so she's leading the development of our own methods to analyze the bycatch data. Obviously, North Carolina's data is very detailed, but it's a more limited spatial scale, so I think we're trying to figure out how to incorporate that more detailed information with a limited spatial scale into the larger, more broad coverage of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center observer data, which has a lower sample size and is less detailed than the North Carolina data. But they're both definitely used to complement each other in these analyses.
Good. Anything else on sturgeon? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, is there interest in continuing to discuss implications of jointly David?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Tom pretty well summarized the frustration that you feel as a commission member going to a joint meeting with the Mid-Atlantic Council when they hold all the cards. We're required to do what the SSC says and so forth. And it's not at all that I don't appreciate and value the strength of Magnuson behind our plans. But I know I looked at the stock assessment summary as we were talking for summer flounder, and I don't think as a commission we would be in panic mode, which is what in severe reaction mode, I'll say. The F estimate is within a tolerance range. The biomass is declined a little bit, but it's still in the happy face zone. We would probably make a little adjustment, corrective action, but not cause widespread panic. But I think what we've learned over the last few years in this partnership is that, and I've said it a number of times, the Commission is a whole lot more nimble in implementing change, and the Mid-Atlantic Council has come to rely on the Commission to actually handle the recreational fishery. You guys do it. We can't wait until May of the fishing year to know what we're doing. And so I'm hoping that in time we can move to something that's more like complementary management. I understand under Magnuson that they're going to set the bottom line for the quota and things like that. But how do we deal with it? I think the Commission, if the relationship were different, complementary rather than joint, I think we could be more effective in addressing some of these issues and not, frankly, wasting time at an August and a December meeting when the information isn't available or we have no choice. We'll go down in August and we'll hear what the quota is. You're right, and we'll go home. That's what we'll do. And in December, we'll I've called them the crop reports from Tony for a number of years now, where we're waiting for wave 4 is 5 to come in? 4. Wave 4 to come in. So you prepare for 2 weeks for a meeting. This is my strategy going in. This is what I think the problem is. And then you arrive and you meet Tony in the lobby, and she tells you the numbers have changed completely, and here's the new picture, and here's what the Mid-Atlantic Council is going to do. So it's a very frustrating process for everyone. And the commission actually handles recreational fishery. We stand around all day long and we talk about, okay, we'll do conservation equivalency. The states will go deal with it, and the commission takes care of it very effectively in February. So it's not only a waste of time, but it's, that complementary relationship, if we could move to that, would be, I think, a great time saver and much more effective in the end. And then finally is the big one, the allocation question. How on earth can we ever expect to get a real discussion of allocation going if half the affected parties don't have a voice? Lewis is a charitable guy, but I don't think he would have his job very long if on his own he met other states' needs under the current structure. So unless the National Marine Fisheries Service comes in, as I said to Kelly, unless mom and dad come in and tell the kids to get along better and share their toys better, it's not going to happen. So, and the summer flounder assessment, I think, is a good example. I think there are real things going on in that fishery that are causing the problem we have. I guess Chris, and here's another thing. Jim's on the Mid-Atlantic Council, so he gets a letter. I'm still in the dark, except that he shared it, right? Everyone north of New York is in the dark as far as what's going to happen next week. But he is apparently attributing some of the problem, the retrospective pattern, to illegal harvest, which I have no doubt is occurring. I think we helped partially correct that by getting rid of RSA, because I think it's widely perceived, for good reason, that 3% RSA got caught several times during its tenure. That was just a license to cheat, and is with that gone away, at least for now, I think that helps. The other thing is dead discards. How can we address that as in our current structure? I think the commission could, in this respect, we need to work with the MID, but with current trip limits, I mentioned during the executive committee on black sea bass, our commercial trip limit for black sea bass this summer was 10 fish. That's our commercial limit. And we're out of fish. We had to close on July 30th. That's an allocation issue. We're overrun by black sea bass, which is great but frustrating at the same time. More importantly, almost on summer flounder, is dead discards. So we have a fleet of boats that have access to very large landing limits that travel 200 or 300 miles up the coast to fish and take several thousand-pound limits and go back home. And our boats go out for their 100 pounds and in 2 hours have caught 500 to 1,000 pounds. So 400 to 900 pounds go over dead. And they land their 100 pounds because they're picking up some other things. Now, very, very small boats will quit at 100 pounds and go home. A 25-foot boat will. But a 50-foot boat is not, or an 80-foot boat is not. And so these are fundamental problems that aren't getting addressed because of our joint management structure and not fully coming to terms with the issues that we could be dealing with. And I've said it any number of times, I think this is the best venue we have. The grand experiment, I think, as Robert referred to the commission, grand experiment in federalism. You always say things better than I do, but I thought he's exactly right. This is the one place that you can come state to state and talk about how do we solve common problems. And through the council process, it's much more political. It's just a much more difficult arena to get a desirable outcome. And I've said to people, I don't think there's a better example than red snapper in the Gulf of Mexico, where the Gulf Council, made up of the 5 states that share the Gulf resource, could all say this is a lousy plan, we reject it, we want authority. That's the difference between a council process and the commission process. So we're not going to solve it today, I know, but I do think we need to revisit this relationship with the Mid-Atlantic Council. I think we're trying to find our way with New England where we overlap, and there's frustrations there too. But at the end of the day, they hold all the federal system holds all the cards in terms of quotas, and we're not taking enough advantage of what this body can do in terms of fairness and equity, in terms of flexibility to move more quickly and more effectively in management. So, I hope we don't lose this idea of refining how we do things, refining the relationship, as a state that's not on the Mid-Atlantic Council, hoping that there'll be a day when we have more opportunity to speak at an equal level with equal ability to influence outcomes. I don't know, again, in the council process, I don't know if Dewey is still a member of the council from North Carolina, but I just take him as an individual that seems like a great guy, knowledgeable, but he's a commercial fisherman for North Carolina. How could he ever vote for something that, even in his heart, he knew was right? How could he vote for something that would take away from his state? He wouldn't be able to go back home again. That's the difference with the commission process, versus the council. So I do think we need to make some movement. It may be this experience on summer flounder that helps that, but because I think a great example is summer flounder, and we're losing these fish, these missing fish, that's causing a retrospective pattern. It's dead discards and sea sampling. It's probably some cheating. It's things that we can deal with better as a commission. So, Tom?
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is when we look at the federal managed species on the East Coast, one of the most information fisheries that we have is summer flounder. NIMS studied that to me when going back to Bill Hogarth, when we put all these studies together back in the 90s and through. We have more information on summer flounder than we have on any other species. Yet when it comes to risk assessment, which the council puts in their management plan, and then the SSC compounds that, we're putting on a tier 3, which means we get very precautionary along every move of the way, and which we start reducing the quota. That is not something that we discuss with the Mid-Atlantic Council when it comes to those risk assessment moves. And that is basically what's happening with black sea bass, summer flounder, and scub when it comes to the quotas, because it's all 3. The other problem is when black sea bass is we are really still using the same biological information we had in '94 with a few tweaks. What we really have done is now they're looking at a new model, which I applaud, to handle the bad information. But that's all we've done for the last 10 years is look at models that we handle bad information and try to get better models to do that instead of getting better information. And I think my other concern here is we've gone to a point, when striped bass really worked in the 90s in the recreational sector is because they had trust in the system and rebuilding the stocks. And that still goes on. There might have been discussion whether we go 1 fish, 2 fish, whether we need a reduction or not, but people trust, the recreational anglers trust in the system. And that's how you get law enforcement. When the recreational angler no longer basically trusts the system, figures that they're just going to get screwed, let's put it simply, no matter what they do and nobody cares, then they're going to start breaking the law. I used to be invited on a lot of boats to go fishing, throwing for gas, and these guys don't invite me anymore because they don't want me to be on a boat when they basically do things that are not on the up and up. And that's a shame because these people were conservation-minded, and they really they respect me more enough to say, Tom, you can't go on my trips anymore. And that's a shame. And I'm sitting there trying, well, we got to follow laws, but you know what's going to happen. And we're forcing people to basically feel like they have to poach when they go through 30 summer flounder to try to get a keeper. And that's my real concern. When we lose that, because then we're going to have all this mortality in there, because once that breaks down the recreational sector, unlike the commercial where you can basically do dockside landings, you can enforce it there. A lot of what happens, we got, 11 Marine officers in New Jersey that basically enforce the laws in the whole state. You can't basically supervise 1.3 million anglers with 8 law enforcement. It's mainly trusting the system, believing that you're doing, and it's peer pressure. I mean, a person walked off the jetty in Island Beach State Park with 23 blacks to talk, as we call them, blackfish. And there was calls made immediately to law enforcement, so when they got off the jetty and they started walking out of the beach, they got nailed immediately. If that was summer flounder, there wouldn't have been that call. And that's my concern when we really look at this, because then the laws become a joke.
Well, I had hoped we wouldn't get into this conversation because it makes my blood pressure go up. There's a different perspective here, Dave, and you gave a very good call for the issues that you have in the Mid-Atlantic with summer flounder, certainly, and I don't disagree with you, and it is so frustrating. Where it's equally frustrating is where we don't have any joint plans and have absolutely no say in the South Atlantic. And I made an effort years ago to try to get something done with snapper grouper, and the council folks freaked out about that possibility. And there's a lot of snapper grouper complex species that should be managed, with a joint plan with the commission, in my opinion. But we can't get it, and then we get a decision that smooth dogfish are a highly migratory species, from nymphs, and it's just the whole process is so inconsistent, between how the Mid-Atlantic works, how the South Atlantic works, how HMS works, how they treat us, what they consider how they consider our comments, all these things, and thinking about it, that's really what we should have been talking to John Bullard about on Monday morning. As raising these concerns. That's where and maybe instead of talking about some of the frou-frou stuff we talked about, and some of it was very valid, but these problems, we had Roy on the phone, we had John on the phone. You couldn't have two more different management strategies and styles that create all these concerns and problems, especially for states with overlapping jurisdictions. There are a few of us, but we sit on the Mid and the South. Totally different animals, but they're the same agency. And so, and what's going to happen with sharks? We talked about that some at the state directors meetings too. You saw the table up here that had all these sharks that hadn't been assessed for some 10 years and still listed as unknown, and we're overrun with them. We've got charter boats coming back with 40, 50 yellowfin tuna heads. Can't get a live fish to the boat. For the dusky sharks that are supposedly not going to be rebuilt until 2700 or something, So, we can't seem to get that level of connection with our federal partners on this, and it is a major issue. And I really hope that the summer flounder issue will result in some positive change in all this. But I don't have a whole lot of positive. I don't have a good feeling about it. Not as long as the federal side is calling all the shots. Yes, sir. Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Relative to the discussion of summer flounder and interaction with the councils, I would just like the Summer Flounder Board commissioners to realize there's going to be an impact from the New England Council, and maybe some of the people around this table who also sit on the New England Council can provide excuse me, more information. But the summer flounder fishery is likely to be severely impacted, in fact shut down, by the sub-ACLs and the associated accountability measures that are set up for window pane flounder. If the window pane flounder meets its, and I'm not sure if it's the overall ACL or the sub-ACLs, the summer flounder fishery off New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island is going to be closed. And we have no interaction on that issue at all. Thank you.
So maybe this is a good topic for our next state directors meetings with our regional directors. And I don't know if John's planning to come to Fort Lauderdale, but we'd already talked about getting together with Roy and Bonnie at the South Atlantic Board at the annual meeting. Perhaps we could expand that. So, but I think it's a very important topic, and clearly some folks are very passionate about it. Probably none more so than me. So I don't want to chair that meeting, Bob. I guess I wouldn't, but all right. Anything else on joint management? Good. All right. The Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnership report from Ms. Hobble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief update since the spring meeting. Good. Okay. We received feedback from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife on our 2015 accomplishment report, and we reached a tier 2 out of 3, and this is based on the number of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife goals that we accomplished, and out of, this is the highest level that was achieved by any of the partnerships. 9 out of 19 partnerships ranked in a tier 2, and this is the first year that we've reached a tier 2. Prior to 2015, we were always in a tier 1. Based on these accomplishments, we were able to fund an extra project, and the projects that we did fund for 2015 consisted of our ACFIP operations, a fish passage project in Patton Stream, Maine, a dam removal project in East Bridgewater, Massachusetts, a river enhancement project in Cape Fear River, North Carolina, and in total over $160,000 went directly to on-the-ground restoration, and this is almost $100,000 more than in 2014. And this is because we reached that tier 2 position. We also put out a request for proposals for the 2016 fiscal year back in July on the 22nd, and this announcement was shared via our Facebook page, mailing list. It was emailed out to the partners. It was put up on our website. We shared it with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Coastal Program, and then ISFMP also put it on their Twitter, Facebook, and sent out a press release. The deadline for proposals is on the 21st of September in 2015, and we will be sharing with you during the annual meeting which proposals we will be recommending to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for funding. And that's it with that. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Questions on our update? Seeing none, very good. Thank you very much. All right, next, Max, if you'll give us a review of the Horse Creek Aqua Farm sturgeon transfer. I think this is just an informational item too, but one we need to know about.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so I'll be just reviewing a memo that went out in meeting materials. Essentially, The memo informed the board that in February of this year, 6,837 pounds of Atlantic sturgeon was sold from La Paz. Live Atlantic sturgeon was sold from La Paz aquaculture facilities in North Carolina to Horse Creek Aqua Farms in Florida. Originally, these fish were from Canadian sources and were exported to La Paz in 2005 and 2006 in accordance with Addendums 2 and 3 of Amendment 1 to the Atlantic Sturgeon Fishery Management Plan. Also, to fulfill the requirements of Addendum 1, Horse Creek Aqua Farms received approval from the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, essentially certifying that they meet the best management practices and state aquaculture regulations to culture Atlantic sturgeon for the production of sale of meat and caviar. So that letter of approval is enclosed in the memo. Also, a bill of sale from La Paz to Horse Creek is included, and the original certificate of non-indigenous origin that accompanied the sale. Also, with that completed sale, La Paz no longer possesses Atlantic sturgeon and has no plans to do so in the foreseeable future. And lastly, that Horse Creek is currently developing a methodology to easily distinguish their caviar from wild-caught sources and will require board approval at that time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oops. Questions?
Mike, can you please put the eel motion up on the board, please?
We have a motion. Marty, are you going to make this as the vice chair of the eel board? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully Joe and everybody can hear me. I'm afraid to touch this microphone. Every time I do, I seem to take down the power grid. But I'll be happy to read the following non-compliance findings into the record for the American Eel Board. On behalf of the American Eel Management Board, move that the ISFMP Policy Board recommend to the Commission that the state of Delaware be found out of compliance for not fully and effectively implementing and enforcing Addendum 3 to the Fishery Management Plan for American Eel. Delaware has not implemented the following regulations required by Addendum 3. 9-inch minimum size for yellow eel recreational and commercial fisheries, 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch minimum mesh size for yellow eel pots, allowance of 4-inch by 4-inch escape panels in pots of 1-inch by 1-inch mesh for 3 years, beginning on January 1st, 2014. Recreational 25 fish bag limit per day per angler. Crew and captain involved in for hire are exempt and allowed 50 fish bag limit per day. The implementation of these regulations is necessary to achieve the conservation goals and objectives of the FMP to rebuild the depleted American eel stock. In order to come back into compliance, the state of Delaware must implement all measures listed above as contained in Addendum 3 to the Fishery Management Plan for American eel.
Thank you, and that motion does not need a second. Kelly?
Thank you, Chair. Just a reminder to the board that there are a couple components, and I appreciate the motion on the board that references the nexus with the conservation goals of the commission, and would certainly appreciate hearing additional comments if there are any from the members of the board, just to further inform the process, as that is one of the 2 criteria that we have to hit as part of the non-compliance requirements. So appreciate hearing any further thoughts that the board has to offer on that conservation nexus.
Doug?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kelly, the goal of Addendum 3 is to reduce mortality across all life stages. And both in Addendum 3 and Addendum 4, we addressed all life stages with management measures to try and address that goal. The specific measure to increase the minimum size to 9 inches was intended to delay mortality and to increase escapement of yellow eels. The change in the mesh size was necessary to ensure escapement of undersized eels to match this new 9-inch minimum size requirement. And clearly the reduction in bag limit was intended to reduce mortality on the recreational fishery. So I think all of these things were all of these measures up here were intended to achieve our goal here, and not having them implemented makes it so that our achievement of this goal is in jeopardy.
Lauren, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to the motion just addressed by Marty, I did not hear a time frame for expectation of compliance. Perhaps I missed it, but is there a time frame? Thank you.
Doug?
Well, clearly, if this, I think we've been made aware that if we decide to forward this noncompliance finding to the Secretary, our Executive Director was 10 working days to submit the letter. The Secretary of Commerce has 30 days to act, to make a decision on it, and then he has up to 6 months to implement the action, the moratorium, if the state of Delaware does not come into compliance. My thought is that I think this should be put in as soon as practicable, and clearly if by sometime the beginning of the fishery in 2016 they have not accomplished this, I would hope that the Secretary of Commerce would take action.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delaware has acknowledged that we're out of compliance on this. If in my description of how we got there, it sounded like I was assessing blame for why that happened, that was not my intent at all. I just would like some clarification. There are two paths our legislature could take to address this. Either address it prescriptively in the legislation, which could happen in January, or they could give us the regulatory authority. If that happened, it would delay actually coming into compliance, because then we would have to promulgate the regulations and go through that process. I'd just like to know if we would be considered back into compliance whether the law was changed either way. Like, even though the regulatory process would still take several more months to bring us into full compliance with the plan, the fact that the law has changed and the department would immediately start the process to bring us into compliance, if that would be a finding of Delaware being back into compliance, or whether we really do need to have everything in place to be considered in compliance. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe you would need to have everything in place to come into compliance. I think January is your best bet, because there will be concerns if a fishery opens in Delaware in 2016 and you're not in compliance. And that may be, if there's another opinion about that, but that would be my recommendation. I got Bob Ballou. Keep your hands up if you want to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious about the step that we're at right now. As I remember from our meeting on Tuesday morning, when we were discussing this process, there are 3 levels of review. This is the second, as I understand it. The third would be the full commission. Is that a business meeting? Would that happen
It's going to happen here in just a minute.
Gotcha. So, and then related there too is the opportunity for the state, in this case Delaware, and John, I realize you're in an awkward position because this is more of a legislative issue than anything else, to be able to respond. Is it your sense that the powers that be, in this case the Delaware legislature, is aware of what's happening here today? And I just wanted to, because again, that's the whole point here, is to make sure that the folks who hold the reins, in this case I think it's your legislature, are aware of the implications of what's happening today. Thank you.
I believe they are. Craig, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I can elaborate on that. And I guess part of that would be to explain how we got to this position. Most of that came through the hearing processes at the beginning of this, and I think it was 2013. At the first hearing, the public was told that we were data poor on this issue 15 times. Socioeconomic data was asked for at the time, which is a charter requirement under the Interstate Fisheries Management Program Charter. They failed to bring that to bear. The following year, the same hearing was in process again. With a different presenter. That presenter offered that we were data poor on this issue twice. And socioeconomic data was also asked for at that time. Some was actually presented from our Delaware State Housing Authority to help this along, to show that we can provide this type of information quickly and easily. And it was ignored. And the response again was no response. It's hard to it's not hard to show our legislators that if we're not going to follow the charter, that there is some issues here, and credibility becomes an issue with this body. Along the same lines, it would take probably less than a day to convince any legislator, as it was brought to bear at the legislative level, with Director Beal's letter saying that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was willing to put these eels on the endangered species list. It would take less than a day to show any legislator in our state that that isn't an accurate statement. So with that, we lose more credibility. And that's the direction that we're heading here. It's serious. It's not just with this plan. It's with many other plans that are trying to be implemented. When you bring part of the science and not all the science to the public, it's kind of like you bring your lunch, but you forgot your thermos. And you eat your sandwich, but you left with a bad taste in your mouth. And if these scientific requirements of socioeconomic data are required, we expect to see them, especially in the future. I know there's been some talk of that here lately. We appreciate that. But in the past, there has been none. These people that are represented by these legislators are quite impoverished, worked all their lives or were recreated in the same areas all their lives in these places, and they expect some sort of real representation. And the legislators are willing to do that for these people. And as I say, we take this as a very serious matter in the state of Delaware today. The process, as described yesterday, was inaccurate and not correct. As the legislature had 2 years to look at this, that is not necessarily true. The legislature had one day to look at it 2 years ago. It was brought to bear on the last evening of the session, and it failed. This year was brought during the last week and was brought not as what you see on a screen. In those terms, it was brought as a full regulatory process, which our people in our state are happy with the state process that we have now. In saying all this, understand that what your requirements are stating on the screen can be met very early next year. We are in agreement with that, and that is not an issue. It will not be an issue, and I'll make sure it's not an issue. And with that, I'm a simple man with a simple plan. But if you have certain charter requirements that this board is supposed to present, then our people are going to require that. Simple as that. And if it doesn't, then we're going to go through this again. Any questions? I will fix the problem. It will be, what you see up there will be a law in the state of Delaware. How you follow through, that's up to you. If you want to follow through further, I welcome the conversation with the Secretary of Commerce. I expect them, and I said that to these people at the meeting at the Legislative Hall at the day they presented their bill. I welcome that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, I got Dave Simpson next.
I just wanted to make sure when I heard it read, and I'm looking at it here, I just wanted to make sure it was clear for Delaware and everyone that there's a 3-year time period to implement the escape panel, so they would have until 2017 on that element. Is that right?
It'd have to be in place for January 1, 2017.
I'm sorry, that's for us, that's our legislative session will not begin until January. I don't know if we can get an allowance when they start earlier or not. I have to work through that. I could get back with you on that, but somewhere in January should be a possibility. January 1st, probably not.
And that's just the mesh requirement, Dave.
Yes, and to be clear, it's January 1 of 2017. So that one, there's actually, that one piece, there's actually, they're not technically out of compliance on that yet, was my point.
They don't have an escape panel at all.
They don't have?
There's an allowance for the 4x4. And then it moves to move to the new panel, but they don't have anything right now.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, David, the 3-year allowance that's mentioned here in the motion and in Addendum 3 allows all the states to use, instead of modifying the entire trap to be 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, they can use a 4-inch by 4-inch panel of that larger mesh. And that allowance to use that 4-inch by 4-inch panel is in effect now through January 1 of 2017. Then after January 1 of 2017, the entire pot has to be modified and made out of that 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch mesh. So what Delaware has not implemented a provision to implement the 4x4 escape panel or a modification to the entire trap.
Brandon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question, it's not specific to Addendum 3, but Doug had brought it up and mentioned Addendum 4, where there are additional measures that I think already needed to be in place. I was just wondering if we're going to go down this same road with Addendum 4. Those needed to be in place, I think, of January 1 of 2015. Addendum 4 requirements which addressed the silver eel fishery. Addendum 3 was primarily the yellow eel fishery. Are those in place in Delaware? is the addendum 4 measures for the silver eels in place, where you had to close essentially your silver eel fisheries.
John?
Yeah, Brandon, we don't have any silver eel fishery. We don't, in the terms of having weirs or anything like that, there's nothing like that in Delaware. And even the escape panel is kind of a moot point. Even though we don't have a mesh requirement currently in our law, nobody's using anything other than half by half in their traps. So I don't see that as a problem. But in terms of silver eel, other than, are you talking about actually putting into the law that we do not allow the harvest of silver eel? We have not done that. No, we could do that, though, to add it to the suite of changes to our law.
Did you have something else, John? I have you down next.
I was just going to mention about the mesh, that it's not really an issue.
Richie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up what Bob was saying, so as of January 1, Delaware will not have the ability to have the escape panel. They're going to have to go, their fishermen will have to go to the 1/2 inch mesh on the whole pot. 17, excuse me, January 1, 17. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Our fishermen are already at that point. It doesn't say it in the law, but the common practice on the commercial side is half of half, and it has been for a number of years. So that part is, it's simple, it's easy. It's actually already done. It just doesn't say it in the law. But we can make that happen.
Any further discussion on the motion from the eel board? Do we need to caucus? If not, we will do a roll call vote. And hopefully I don't have to read this again. I do? Oh, okay.
Here we go. Maine?
Yes.
New Hampshire?
Yes.
Massachusetts?
Yes.
Rhode Island?
Yes.
Connecticut?
Yes.
New York?
Yes.
New Jersey?
Yes.
Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Delaware?
Yes.
Maryland?
Yes.
District of Columbia? PRFC?
Yes.
Virginia?
Yes.
North Carolina?
Yes.
South Carolina?
Yes.
Georgia?
Yes.
Florida?
Yes.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
Abstain.
National Marine Fisheries Service?
Abstain.
Yep. So the motion carries unanimous with 2 abstentions. Thank you very much. All right, we've got Dave.
Yeah, so I will have to confess then that I've misunderstood this requirement of the plan, and Connecticut has not been in compliance with the escape panel or escape mesh. I don't know what current practice is, but at the time, we did not have declaration authority to change mesh. I have a regulation package that contains this provision, and we will be moving to implement that as quickly as possible, but I wanted the board to know that that is one element that we're not in compliance with.
All right. Seeing no motions to find Connecticut out of compliance, we will move on to Mr. Chu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kevin Chu from NOAA Fisheries in Garfo. And I asked for a little bit of time to make sure that the Commission was aware of a development in the Mid-Atlantic Regional Planning Body. The Mid-Atlantic RPB is considering taking up fishing as one of its topics to discuss ways to improve interjurisdictional collaboration. For those of you who are not familiar with the Mid-Atlantic Regional Planning Body, it's one of, I think, 9 different regions of the ocean where by executive statute or executive order, the regions have been brought together with states and federal agencies and interested tribes to try to improve interjurisdictional collaboration, to look for ways in which the states and the federal governments can work more closely together. The goal is to streamline processes. The goal is to make the decision-making process more effective, more efficient. So the Mid-Atlantic Regional Planning Body in particular includes all the coastal states from New York down to Virginia. North Carolina was spared being part of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Planning Body. It contains all of the federal agencies like the, NOAA, of course, and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the Department of Defense, Coast Guard, EPA, etc., and 2 recognized tribes, or 1 recognized tribe at the moment. There's another one that was just recognized, not yet a member. And it is charged with developing a plan by the end of 2016 for improving collaboration across state and federal boundaries. And it is in the process right now of developing topics that it will look into. These topics include relatively broad issues like national security, sand and gravel management, wind energy development, and marine transportation, and it also includes fisheries management. The RPB has identified 4 areas of fishing management that they think are important for their further discussion. They include coordination of management of fisheries, data collection, research on fisheries, and several specific issue areas. And I'd like to read those issue areas to give you a flavor of the kinds of things that they are thinking that the RPB might want to get involved in. There are only 3 of them. One is federal agencies to provide states with better integration and analysis of fishing effort and stock data to help states identify and articulate state interests in federally managed stocks. Second, to consider changes in the collection and analysis of fisheries data in response to accelerated changes in climate, habitat, and population dynamics. And third is to consider ways to improve understanding of recreational fishing industry. Next week at the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council, Mike Luisi, who is, as you all know Mike from Maryland, he's the representative for the Mid-Atlantic Council on the Mid-Atlantic Regional Planning Body. He's going to make a presentation there that may, in fact, be a better forum for states and federal agencies to discuss the ways to collaborate better on fisheries management. But the purview of the regional planning body goes from the coastline through state waters and federal waters. So it seemed appropriate to call the attention of this body to make sure that they are aware that there is a sort of higher level group that's beginning to think about ways to improve fisheries management. And I'll stop there if there are any questions.
Tom?
I've been part of this process when Paul Sanford was up basically talking about me and Bruce Freeman and a number of other. And one of the things we basically always said clearly is we didn't want this body to get involved in fisheries management. We said we had councils, we had NOAA, we had everything else involved, and we didn't need another body to do this. And at the time, it was strongly by both the commercial and the recreational sector in many areas, and there was a lot of concern that they would, because of their concerns with basically looking at sometimes not in the best interest of fishermen. Simple sand mining right now. We're basically sand mining lumps off New Jersey, basically used for beach replenishment, and we've been turned down, and the fisheries implications have not been put forward on this. So there's a lot of concern what I have and the people that have expressed to me over this, and it was a lot of, from not just from New Jersey, it was up and down the coast. The same thing with a lot of the environmental groups, because they figure because they're widespread they're doing, and again, we've lost out when we get into the table sitting with the ports. The Port of New York can basically supersede even the governors when it comes to what they need to be done. So there was a lot of concern. There's still that same concern. I haven't heard it. I attended a workshop, a presentation, and basically did my thing about what's going on in Rhode Island, about the cooperative between the wind farming and everything, and it was very interesting and a very interesting film. I saw the second film, which they put out, which was also very interesting. But the public doesn't need another group that has to go sit to make sure they're not getting the short end of the stick. We have now the council, we have HMS, we have to go directly to NIMS, and then we have the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And that was the concern of the commercial and the recreational sector that I had and heard when I attended those meetings. So I will be looking at this with a very, very concerned, I would say, thing, and I'm just not sure that that's the proper body or where the money's coming from. If they had a pot of gold, which they could basically spend on all this research, then I'd probably welcome them in, but this is not what, they don't have the money to do any of what they're going to suggest, and we don't have the money, so I'm not holding out a lot of hope.
John?
Just to follow up on what Tom said there, I'm appointed to the RPB from Delaware, and because of kind of the ambiguity of the charge there, I mean, it does not have regulatory authority, does not have any funds to spend, and yet it's all these different bureaucracies that have an interest in ocean efforts. There is a lot of concern because we had the same thing happen in the Delaware hearings where many of our fishermen were there thinking that this was a effort to get marine protected areas out there. So I think the overall push for all the bureaucracies to coordinate better on ocean policy is a good one, but it still has been generating a lot of concern among the public.
We will stay tuned, and thank you for the update, Kevin. That concludes the or does it, Bob?
Very quickly, a couple of commissioners have come up and asked me about EEL compliance review and the timing of the next full compliance review. And the state compliance reports are due September 1st, so in a couple of weeks we'll get a full suite of those, and the plan review team will look over all the state's measures and have a full report at the annual meeting. All the states will get a memo from Mike in the next couple of days detailing what exactly the states are needed to implement under Addenda 3 and 4, and so that'll be the timing of the full review for all the other states.
So we'll have that at the annual meeting?
Yes.
Okay. All right. With that, I will close or adjourn the ISFMP Policy Board. Welcome to the business meeting of the full commission. We have an agenda in our briefing books. I don't have one with me, but we're dealing with the Jonah Crab FMP, and we're dealing with the compliance finding of Delaware. So I'm not sure if we had, okay, there it is. So we have an agenda and our proceedings from May. as long as everyone is comfortable with the agenda and the minutes, they will stand approved by consensus. Not having seen the public interest in speaking, or nobody has signed up, we will move. I'm going to move straight in first to the non-compliance finding on Delaware.
You skipped orders.
I did skip order. Because if this gets a lot of discussion, then I may have to leave.
Dave has one question.
You got it up? There we go. Who does?
Simpson has a question.
Okay.
Just one brief thing to add to other business, and that would be compliance reports. Is that appropriate for this session, or should I have done it 30 seconds ago?
You should have done it 30 seconds ago. We'll let you do it in 30 minutes. Okay, so on behalf of the ISFMP Policy Board, I move the Commission find the state of Delaware out of compliance for not fully and effectively implementing and enforcing Addendum 3 to the Fishery Management Plan for American Eel. Delaware has not implemented the following regulations required by Addendum 3: 9-inch minimum size for yellow eel recreational and commercial fisheries, half by half-inch minimum mesh size for yellow eel pots, allowance of 4 by 4-inch escape panel in pots of 1-inch by inch mesh for half-inch by half-inch mesh for 3 years, beginning on January 1, 2014. Recreational 25 fish bag limit per day per angler. Crew and captain involved in for-hire are exempt and allowed 50 fish bag limit per day. The implementation of these regulations is necessary to achieve the conservation goals and objectives of the FMP to rebuild the depleted American eel stock. In order to come back into compliance, the state of Delaware must implement all measures listed above as contained in Addendum 3 to the Fishery Management Plan for American Eel. Just for the record, we had several folks provide additional information on the need for implementing these actions in the state of Delaware to the satisfaction of the net service. And so that is the motion in front of the full commission. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right. We will need to do this by roll call vote again as well.
Maine?
Yes.
New Hampshire?
Yes.
Rhode Island?
Yes.
Oops, Massachusetts, apologies. Didn't mean to skip you.
What happened to me?
I call you now.
Oh, yes.
Connecticut?
Yes.
New York?
Yes.
New Jersey?
Yes.
Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Delaware?
Yes.
Maryland?
Yes.
Virginia?
Yes.
North Carolina?
Yes.
South Carolina?
Yes.
Georgia?
Yes.
Florida?
Yes.
All right. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
For the Jonah Crab FMP, the Lobster Board forgot to discuss whether or not we wanted to make any recommendations to NOAA Fisheries on the items that were approved through the Lobster Board's recommendations anyway, before the full commission discusses whether or not they want to approve the full FMP. So I'm going to turn to our Lobster Board chair to bring this up.
I'm not the Lobster Board chair, but I'm glad to make a motion. So I move to request NOAA Fisheries implement the provisions of Sections 3 and 4 of the Jonah Crab FMP in federal waters pursuant to the authority of the Atlantic Coastal Act.
And those provisions are the monitoring requirements as well as the management measures that are contained in the document. And the management measures include things such as permit requirements, size limits, trip limits for non-directed gears, recreational limits. I think that covers the majority of them.
All right, we have a motion from Mr. Grout. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Adler. Any discussion on the motion? Is there any objection to this motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously.
Is the lobster motion?
Dan, would you care to make the motion to accept the full FMP for Jonah Crab?
You want me to read the motion on the board?
No, that one we've already done. That was just a housekeeping item from the lobster board.
Okay.
On behalf.
I'll move that the ISFMP Policy Board accept the Jonah Crab Fisheries Management Plan as approved today by the board.
Dan, just
yes.
to help you perfect, on behalf of the Lobster Board, you would recommend the full commission.
Thank you, Tony. Move that the ISFMP Policy Board...
Full commission, no ISFMP Policy Board.
We're going to change that? Move that the full commission accept the Jonah Crab Fisheries Management Plan on behalf of the American Lobster Management Board.
Motion's on the floor, does not need a second as it comes from our lobster board. Is there any discussion on the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Dan. Is there any other business to come before the full commission?
Wait 1 second.
Yeah, we're adding the interstate fishery management plan.
Joe may need you to read it now.
Do I need to read it again now, Joe?
No, I'll get it.
Okay.
Just copy it.
Okay. So we're all good? Okay, Dave?
Yeah, so related to my misunderstanding before, for a number of years I've expressed my frustration with compliance reports and how they aren't really effective at demonstrating compliance, and it has more to do with, reporting landings and other information. And for example, our eel report that's due September 1, I think, is probably 30-some pages long, and that causes us, me and staff, to miss the fact that we weren't in compliance with the plan, which I thought we were. So again, I'd urge that we rethink our compliance plans reports and have a very simple compliance report for states that when the commission or a board passes an addendum or amendment that requires changes, that a letter go out from the commission that says you need to do this, this, and this, and that a letter comes back demonstrating that this, and this was done with a copy of the statute, regulation, declaration, whatever it is, that demonstrates that it was done. Nice, simple, distinct from any of the other work that, my staff and your staffs do to report on landings, report on troll survey indices, all of that other stuff that isn't relevant and is also not timed with implementation or the timetable for compliance. So I would just make that request one more time.
And Dave, we'll definitely do that. We have revised the format for compliance reports, and staff does their best to send memos out 90 days prior to the date that the compliance reports are due. I fully admit that sometimes those are late, but we do in that memo outline the information that is needed under that plan and a lot of staff even go as far as to sort of have a fill-in-the-blank table that states need to fill out. Some states still are just filling in their last year's compliance report, so they're just going back and refilling in the numbers, and some of that information we're no longer asking for. So if states could be careful to pay attention to those memos when we send them out, and I'll make my plug as I normally do. When there is confidential data in your compliance report, it needs to be on the cover highlighted so that staff realize that there is confidential data in there and that the confidential data is highlighted within the report, because otherwise it can be very difficult for us to find, and then it could be released to the public, and we do not want to do that.
Okay.
But still, those reports that we put together, in fact, have very little to do with compliance. So they're summaries of our trawl survey indices. They're summaries of our landings that are already available on the website. It's a very frustrating, time-consuming process for us that we're getting to a point where we can't afford that time anymore. Our staff is diminished enough that, I've got trawl survey people in the middle of 50-hour weeks that are having to write a compliance report that's, a summary of National Marine Fisheries Service data that's on the website or the MRIP site and trawl survey indices. We can provide those when they're needed for the assessment, but this is just the greatest example of I missed something and everyone else did too, because it's lost in all this other stuff we provide that has nothing to do with compliance.
Dave, in some cases that's required by the plan for the state to report, so maybe we can sit down and look at the compliance, the FMPs that have those types of compliance reports, and then bring that up to each of the species management boards, and the species management boards can decide whether or not they want to include it as part of the compliance report or as potentially part of submission of data for data updates or the stock assessments. But somehow we would need to have an indication that that information is being collected and accounted for each year, because the plan does require us to collect that information.
Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the point David's making is right on, which is that, we wait a long time to submit the compliance reports because we're waiting for data to be available on landings and other things. But that delays the review of the state regulations to make sure they're consistent with the FMP. So we've had that conversation in the past, and we said, well, if we do 2 reports per year per plan, that might be better. And a lot of sort of technical level folks roll their eyes and like, 2 reports, I don't want to do 2 reports. But, we maybe we do need 2 reports every time we change management through an addendum or an amendment, something like that. So maybe on a sort of case-by-case basis, we have to do special reports that allow us to review compliance. Once an FMP is up and running and really no states are changing regs, we probably don't need the 2 reports, and we can wait later in the year to get, until the landings data is available. So it may be on a case-by-case basis, but we can report out something and sort of research it and see where we are.
Yeah, I think that's it. Summer flounder, fluke, scup, every year by some date, February, March, April, we need to be in compliance. So a quick, this is what it is, what did you do? When addendum is passed, and you don't need to revisit it every year, but my staff has to go through and find a copy of the regulation and paste it in, and it's 5 years old, and again, I've offered, we're required to report our recreational data. I've offered, I'll do all the states, because there's no more work to do all the states than one. I'd get it off the website, I could put it on a table, I could do it for you. Another state could do the commercial. We're not adding anything except for a provisional number, which, is a mistake to publish anyway.
Okay. Any other business? I have one just quick update on an issue that's been of interest to a lot of you, which is the lawsuit that was filed by the North Carolina Fisheries Association against the recreational fishery for turtle interactions that had the potential of actually enjoining the recreational fisheries possibly all the way into the Gulf of Mexico. That lawsuit was dismissed on all parties for lack of standing by the Fisheries Association in that case, and the decision by the judge is very interesting, and one that certainly you would want to get a hold of a copy of and read, because it's got some very interesting findings in there that could impact case law for some time. So very good news from our perspective. The document does not make it look like there's much of a chance for an appeal to be successful, but you never know. And whether or not they're going to file an appeal or not, we don't know at this time. But just for the Commission's information, that case is out there, and it's a good one to read. Anything else? If not, we'll adjourn the full Commission.